Okay, today I want to talk about the Bing carburetor as used on the Rotec radial engine. This is a standard 40mm throat Bing carburetor as we use on our R2800 radial, and it's got a couple of things and idiosyncrasies I want to talk about. The first thing is that the Bing carburetor has two areas of adjustment. Firstly, it has an idle stop, which by adjusting that idle stop alters the amount of idle butterfly that allows air to come in, air and fuel, and thus that sets the idle speed via this, the use of this idle stop. As you wind it in, the idle RPM will increase, and as you wind it outwards, the idle RPM will decrease. There's also a fitting on the bottom here which on the Rotec radial doesn't really have much effect. It's just simply a needle that's supposed to add very fine mixture adjustment to the Rotec engine, and for a variety of reasons it doesn't have much effect on our engine, so we normally have that around about 3 turns out, and anywhere between 3 and 5 turns really has no effect. And that's mainly because that hole, this little hole here is not large enough, but as it turns out, over 10 years of operation it's really not that important. The mixture is more than adequate for the engine to run smoothly, and if we just set this idle stop, you'll have a good mixture. As long as that's wound out about 3 or 4 turns, it'll have very little effect on our engine. Now, a lot of the Bing carburetor, one of the problems it suffers from is fuel flooding, and the reason for that is it's actually a carburetor designed for motorcycle use, and as a result it doesn't have pressurized fuel pressure. It relies more on the motorcycle having a fuel tank positioned above the carburetor and just relying on gravity to supply pressure. Now, when the use on our engines and the Jabiru and the Rotacs and many other engines, we use a mechanical fuel pump, and sometimes the needle and seat, which is a little bit large in diameter, can be too weak to withstand the pressure created by the mechanical fuel pressure. There are a couple of ways around that. Now, the first thing that will happen is if you overpressurize the fuel in the float chamber, once the fuel level comes to a certain level and the floats are supposed to shut the needle and seat, what actually happens is the excessive mechanical pressure will actually partly override that situation, and as a result the needle and seat will not function properly and leak, and the bowl will become excessively full, and eventually fuel will come out of this little 1/8 brass nipple here. This 1/8 brass nipple is nothing more than a breather to ventilate the float chamber. Now, if you do find that your Bing is flooding, one of the things that we've done in the past is either reduce or regulate the fuel pressure coming from the mechanical pumps, or check the float level. Now, if you remove the clip if you just push back the clip towards the entrance of the carburetor, the bowl will come away. Be careful of this gasket. Don't pinch or lose this gasket or damage it. Now, you'll see we now have these floats. Now, as those floats come up and down, they close the needle and seat. The needle and seat is actually actuated by this little tab here. Now, we can actually advance or retard the position of that tab and alter the fuel level and exactly when the needle and seat closes. There's the tab there. If I bend that tab down, you can actually sometimes get your little screwdriver and get under like that and lever it down, or you can get back underneath and lever it up. Perhaps a smaller screwdriver would be better. And once you've established your new position there, you can then put the bowl back on. Again, be careful not to pinch the gasket, and put the clip on. Now, what you can do is you can then get I've got some petrol in a squeeze bottle with a hose, and I will put that on the inlet nipple of the carburetor, and I might lose some fluid here, and we'll start filling the bowl of the carburetor. Now, if I squeeze on this bottle really hard, I know from experience I can produce around about 7 to 8 psi of pressure. Now, as a rule, that would normally be too much for the Bing carburetor to withstand, but because it's not vibrating and the engine's not running, it's actually working okay. Quite often when you bounce the carburetor, you'll see that the fuel is starting to now come out of the breather nipple here because it's bouncing, and quite often on rough runways or an engine that's running, with vibration, that will be enough for the fuel to come out. So what we'll do is we'll now disconnect that nipple, and very carefully I'm just going to remove the bowl again, being careful not to lose any fluid. Now as you can see, the float level is way too high, and that's because the needle and seat was failing through to the floats because the floats were bouncing up and down, and also I was supplying excess fuel pressure. So we'll get rid of that. So I'll just do a demonstration here of how it works. Here is our carburetor in level position, and I'm holding with my fingers, I'm holding the floats up. Now that will seal the needle and seat. As I lower the floats, when they get to about the level position, you'll start to see the needle and seat let fuel in, which you can see about there. Now that they're dropped, it's flooding dramatically. Bring it up to about halfway and it should stop.